Okay, so my name is Xander Naylor. I'm a guitarist and composer based in New York City in the USA.
Hi, my name is Kedarnath Havaldar. I'm a tabla player. I come from a family of musicians. It's all about Hindustani music in my family. My father is Pandit Nagaraj Rao Havaldar, who is a vocalist, and my elder brother, Omkar Nath Havaldar, who is also a vocalist. So music has always been a part of my life. And tabla just happened and I took over and never left.
Hi, I'm Samhita. I run and curate at the Blue Room, Bangalore.
Hi, I'm Surya. I volunteer at the Blue Room and I also sometimes run shows.
So we weren't exactly planning on using this space for public events. This was initially created by my dad because he supports a lot of Carnatic and Hindustani music. So this was intended for smaller private gatherings or even film screenings. Basically, ever since I was a child, I've always missed the opportunity of being able to hear music that I loved up close. And I always found a lot of magic in concerts and being really close to the stage and being able to see people I love playing music. So it's been really important that we bring this to as many people as possible. And there's no better way of doing it than in the context of a house concert. Because these are local. So, Jayanagar will have a house concert, Indranagar, Kormangala. And that way, it actually opens the doors for artists to play more shows, get paid a lot better. So this is what we're trying to do in our own tiny little way. And, secretly, we're just really lucky. I mean, not secretly. We're just really lucky we get to do this.
For me, jazz is an attitude more. It's a way of creating music in a creative way. For me, it's not necessarily a genre. You take something and then you play around with it, and then you create forms and you create tension and release and kind of musical magic with what you have and what is a part of yourself. And even if what is part of yourself is not the American kind of jazz, it's anyway somehow jazz, at least as I see it. So
it is quite a malleable term. It's a thing that is open to adaptation and constantly receives and exerts an influence on different art forms, different musical styles. So I don't see it as a fixed thing. There has been a historical kind of trajectory of jazz which you can chart, but I think now jazz incorporates a lot more world music, folk music, electronic music. If you attend any jazz festival now, there's a lot of things that are considered jazz, which perhaps in the past weren't. And while I think they take it a little bit too far in terms of the interpretation of the word jazz, I think it's still good that it's an inclusive art form and not one that says jazz must be only this thing and not something else.
That's sad to hear, in a way. I don't know. I don't know so much about the Indian way. I mean, Indian music is very strong. It's a very strong tradition. So, and this, of course, has these qualities. But I don't know how that is. How is the young people interested in Indian music, the folk music and the ragas? No, no. Because I think that's the key. I think that's the key. You have to start with your own music, and you have to be interested in. Everyone has to be interested in their own music. It's very important for a society.
I think it is really important to for where you live to reflect, or where you have cultural roots to reflect in your music. But I don't think it has to be in a very obvious, prescriptive way. I think when people try and force an identity onto an art form, it's actually counterproductive and quite regressive in some cases. But I think if you're honest about where you live and you're open to what's around you, you'll naturally take influences from so-called indigenous art forms. So I think if you live in India, there's so many different kinds of sounds and so many different influences musically. Even aside from folk and classical music, just the music of the sabziwala walking down the street selling something, or the kabadiwala or whatever. It's, if you're open to everything being potentially a musical or kind of sound-based influence, then there's a lot in this country. In fact, there's a huge amount in this country, much more than many places. So sometimes I've felt that people living in India don't actually, they're not open to what's around them, and they're always looking outwards. Now it's good to look outwards because there's interesting things outside, but there's also interesting things here. So that's my perspective on it.
Western culture coming in here does seem to be pulling people away from the classical music that's happening here. But at the same time, it seems like the globalization is making it so there's more exposure of Indian classical music abroad, for sure. It's so easy for anyone in New York, or even in some completely rural area in the US, or anywhere for that matter, to hear vast amounts of Indian classical music on YouTube instantaneously. So, I don't know. I think maybe those are two kind of crossing paths that are happening right now.
There is this wrong notion that, it's classical music, it's for the elderly people with grey hair or no hair, and it's like, we don't understand it. So these sort of wrong notions have been always floating around, and they also say, it's like dying, it's sort of a dying art, but definitely not. Definitely not. See, if you go to Pune, for example, Savai Gandharva Mahotsav, Bhimsen Mahotsav is what they call it. There are 3,000, 4,000 people sitting in front of you. That's quite a crowd. Yeah, I think that's good enough.
This is kind of an interesting thing for me because coming from the US, I come from a place where there's so many different types of cultures coming and mixing all the time, So for me, I definitely do feel like there's always a reflection in my music of the things that I was brought up on. So for me, that cultural thing is hearing the bands like Rage Against the Machine, Smashing Pumpkins, Sonic Youth that I was listening to when I was a kid. That's always there in the music that I'm making. Certain types of melodicism, certain approach to music. And then other jazz and kind of more Western classical influences came into that. So for me, I feel like, I've always gravitated to kind of different subcultures at different times, and they've made their way in. I think it's a different kind of conversation in the US when there isn't necessarily always one dominant culture, except for the pop culture. So I have my own kind of different reservations about that sometimes because pop culture is such a separate thing from a lot of the more what we might call art music, or something that's being made.
I know that there's many people that that really work hard to kind of preserve jazz as the original, and I respect that really, because there are often American people doing that probably, and they have their full right to do that. But I'm not American, and so my origin is different. I also am connected kind of to the Norwegian music and the Norwegian folk music. So for me, that's maybe even more important as a background than the American kind of jazz.
I have spent a lot of time working on crossing between two cultures, especially in the last few years. But at the same time, there's such an important place for people who are really sticking with their specific culture, because for a lot of people, that's like the way that they are connected with their own history, or their family, their place, the style of life that's going on wherever they live. So I don't think I would really wish for one of those to dominate the other.
And if you get acquaintance with the ragas and sagas and the fantastic tradition that you have here, that's a very good starting point. If you know that, then you can listen to anything, you know. And also as a musician, I mean, to really consider that you are Indian and to bring your own world into your improvisation, and not to kind of copy, but just to bring it with you. You know? It's just something that makes you very, very strong and very special as a culture and a society.
So if we take jazz more kind of loosely as a wide and inclusive umbrella, I think then it's got a healthy future ahead of it, because jazz is not meant to actually please a mainstream. It's meant to be actually, in a way, kind of a protest music. So if there's something subversive about jazz because of the fact that there aren't venues to play it in, and it's forced into so-called underground spaces or non-commercial spaces, that's very healthy for any art form. To create an identity and have an intensity. So I think it's actually healthy for it.
There's so many different types of people in the world, and there's so many different things for people to get interested in. So I think it's just another element in the way that everything is mixing now. And that's always been present with music. You know, even before, people traveling all the way across Asia, you see mixes of the music that's happening in India and what's going on in Iran or something, and the way that it's mixing going across to Africa and then eventually into Europe. You can find linkages just by people traveling by foot all the way from here to Spain, same scales being used. So these kind of transfers are always happening, and I think that's part of the natural flow of how music changes over time. You know, people love talking to each other and they love playing music together.